There are many different jobs available to pharmacists after they graduate pharmacy school, and today I'm going to be talking about 3 of the different career path options for pharmacists after they finish pharmacy school in the United States. I want to make it clear that these aren't the only career paths for pharmacists. There are many others out there, but these 3 are the ones that I get asked about the most frequently, so I thought I would dive in to what the jobs entail, what the hours are, the salaries like, where you would work, and what kind of training is involved to get into those jobs, either required or typically. So let's just dive right in with community pharmacy. Now, while I have not actually worked as a community pharmacist since graduating pharmacy school, I did work in a community pharmacy back in the day as a technician before I started pharmacy school. So I have a good sense of what it's like to work at a community pharmacy because I've done it myself. Community pharmacy is often also known as retail pharmacy, and this job really focuses on patient care and getting meds to patients. You are very patient-facing. You are taking care of them at the counter, over the phone, and sometimes through online consults. The 2 primary duties of pharmacists that work in community pharmacy is filling prescriptions and helping dispense medications. As they're filling prescriptions, they are looking for the safety and efficacy of the medication, not only that they're getting now, but how it interacts with the other medications that they're taking that they are aware of. This is why it's so crucial for patients to tell pharmacists if they're getting medications from multiple pharmacies so they can do a drug interaction check. Through this process, if they see anything that's concerning or they have questions about, they're going to be communicating with either the nurse or the physician at the clinic where the patient has come from, and just try to get the answers that they need to make sure that this prescription is correct and safe for that patient. Another huge part of the job that has evolved over recent years is giving immunizations. While pharmacy technicians have the ability to do that in many areas, the pharmacist still has to be there to look over and make sure that the person who is requesting a immunization is a candidate. There's not any health concerns or reasons why they shouldn't get the vaccine. And in some cases, pharmacists are still administering the vaccines. This becomes a larger portion of the job during flu season because that is when a lot of people come to a pharmacy to get a vaccine. However, there are vaccines that pharmacists can give throughout the year, such as pneumococcal vaccine, shingles, and most likely the RSV vaccine that was recently approved. Some pharmacists will also do point of care testing where it's allowed, so they may do a rapid flu test for you or a rapid COVID test or strep test, and then they are able to give medications in response to the results of your test. Pharmacists also provide patient counseling. So if you come to the counter and you have a question about your medications, it is going to be the pharmacist that answers those questions. Or if you're looking for a recommendation for a medication that is over the counter, maybe you have a cut or a cold and you're just trying to find the right medication for you, they are the perfect person to ask. And so they will do counseling and consultations with patients in that regard. Pharmacists are also collaborating with other healthcare professionals, so if a physician has a question, they will reach out to a pharmacist to ask them whatever that may be, whether it's a patient-specific question or something more general about a medication. A pharmacist is somebody who they would turn to for that information. And like mentioned before, pharmacists also ask physicians questions to make sure that the patient is getting the correct medication and everything is safe. The most common places you're going to find a community pharmacy working is in your traditional pharmacy. So you're going to have independent pharmacies, which are privately owned, small groups of chains. They're not nationwide. You do have chain drug stores, so like your Walgreens, where their primary focus is being a pharmacy, but they're nationwide. There's a whole lot of them. And then you also have pharmacies in your supermarkets or grocery stores. One common myth that I find out there about pharmacist jobs is the work hours for a retail pharmacist. A lot of people are like, oh, these are stable work hours. These people work 40 hours a week. They have great hours. And that is not always the case. Many pharmacies work longer hours now, so they will be open from like 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. So you may be working your regular shift or shifting back and forth from a morning shift to an evening shift. Some pharmacies employ longer hours because of some of the recent changes in drug reimbursement. They're cutting back on pharmacist hours, so you may not work 40 hours anymore in a retail pharmacy setting. Again, this will depend on where you work and what type of pharmacy you're in, but there are plenty of community pharmacists that are working 10, 12-hour shifts, so they may not even always work a traditional like 8-hour shift. The salary for a community pharmacist varies a lot, and I mentioned some of the factors about not working a traditional 40-hour work week And it also changes based on what type of pharmacy you're in. So an independent pharmacy may not pay as much as your large chain pharmacy. As of recording, there are sign-on bonuses in certain areas that maybe are less desirable. So smaller towns or communities, these chain stores or supermarket stores may be offering bonuses to try to get people in those locations. So I'm going to share the salary from Glassdoor, but keep all of that in mind. According to Glassdoor, the current average salary is around $115,000 a year. The typical range goes from $97,000 a year to $139,000 a year, so still a great salary. But if you're wanting to be in a specific area and you're curious what the salary is, I recommend looking in that specific location or state because it varies dramatically across the country. As far as the training required, if you're in the United States, you're going to be graduating pharmacy school nowadays with a Doctor of Pharmacy degree, so that is your baseline requirement to entry. You have to get licensed in the state you're going to practice, but after that, there is no other requirement. You can start this job after pharmacy school. There are residencies for community pharmacists. However, I don't see that as a popular option. Some people do that, especially if they're interested in going to management or if they're wanting to do more of the clinical tasks that I mentioned, such as the point of care testing. And in some states, there are advanced practice pharmacists. And if they want to go that route and work and do more of the consultations and counseling with patients, they may choose that route. But again, it is not required. So next up, let's talk about hospital pharmacy. So this is where I've spent the most time in my pharmacy career. I was an intern in a hospital, I did a residency in a hospital, and then I staffed at a women's and children's hospital for a couple of years. I currently work in a hospital, but I'm a clinical pharmacist specialist in investigational drug service. So actually the majority of my prescriptions that I fill are for outpatients rather than inpatients or people who are hospitalized. So I'm kind of this weird hybrid of the two that don't fit in either and kind of encompasses industry. Now that I've confused you incredibly about what my job entails, let's talk about what a hospital pharmacist does. Job of hospital pharmacist varies a lot based on what your job title is or how it is structured in a specific institution. Things are very different in an academic medical center versus a large private institution versus a small community hospital. And so the exact job titles and duties are going to vary significantly, but I'm going to try to give you a general sense. So there are staff pharmacists, decentralized pharmacists, clinical pharmacist specialists, and they all have a different level of interaction, and even the institution may set what your level of interaction is with patients. Staff pharmacists are going to be in every single hospital. These are the pharmacists that are verifying medication orders that are coming from physicians. They are reviewing the medications that are going out the door to make sure they're safe. They're looking at the IVs that are compounded or any non-sterile compounding that's happening. And they're answering any phone calls from the hospital staff that come into the pharmacy about missing medications, any clinical questions, order verification concerns, and things like that. This role can also include a lot of clinical work, just depending on the institution. So they may review drug levels to see what changes need to be made to the dose based on the level that resulted. They may do other consults such as total parenteral nutrition, where they review those orders and make recommendations. They may do chart reviews. They may help with transitions of care, or some of those duties may fall on a decentralized pharmacist. So this is kind of a hybrid between a staff pharmacist and a clinical pharmacist specialist. That's kind of how I thought about it when I was a student, because they are still helping verify orders. Sometimes they will come down and cover lunches, but they're often more focused on a specific unit or couple of units of patients. They may round with the clinical team. They're there up on the floor to answer any questions that come through about those patients. They may be doing chart reviews or adjusting drug levels for those specific units that they're based in. And they may do a variety of other tasks. And then you have your clinical pharmacist specialist. And these pharmacists typically work in a specific clinical area or floor. They're more focused or targeted, such as like cardiology, emergency medicine, neonatal ICU. These pharmacists typically round with the medical team on a regular basis. They are more of a staple in the unit than the other pharmacists that may cover larger amounts of patients or more different floors. They're oftentimes a part of the emergency response team, and they work on specific clinical improvement projects or research for the units that they are taking care of. Now, most hospital pharmacists work within a hospital, which makes sense, but there are some opportunities for remote work. work depending on the role, and this is typically remote order verification or sometimes chart reviews. The hours that a hospital pharmacist will work vary significantly. It depends on the job title, the duties that you're doing, and how the staffing hours are structured within the hospital. Because hospitals are open 24/7, that means there may be a necessity to have a pharmacist covering 24/7. So you're likely working holidays and weekends. You may have to help cover night shifts. You may do early mornings or mid shifts or evenings. So the actual staffing model is going to vary based on the hospital. The average salary, according to Glassdoor, right now is $129,000. But the range that you're most likely going to see is $109,000 to $155,000. And a lot of that has to do with the location, but also the training and board certification, the job title, and the duties that you're going to do as a pharmacist can make a big difference on that salary as well. The training required is going to once again depend on that job title. For staff pharmacist positions and even some decentralized positions, those jobs are often available right out of pharmacy school. You don't need additional training for that. However, residency training is often preferred or encouraged for many of these roles as well. And for many clinical pharmacist specialist roles, it is required that you have at least 1 year of residency, and preferred often to have 2, depending on the specialty area that it's in. I will say that the type of institution and the size of the institution makes a difference on how necessary residency training is. Smaller institutions in a rural area are less likely to require a residency, even if they may prefer it, than, say, a large academic medical center that has a large residency program where they are going through a lot of residents each year. And lastly, let's talk about industry pharmacy. An industry pharmacist works within a pharmaceutical company like Pfizer, Merck, Bayer, etc. Don't work directly with patients, but that doesn't mean that they can't impact patient care, because the work they do still does matter to patients. Like I mentioned earlier, I currently work as an investigational drug service pharmacist, so I'm not an industry pharmacist, but I work with a lot of pharmacists within the pharmaceutical industry because our institution is partnered with them on different clinical trials. And there are so many different aspects of the pharmaceutical industry that pharmacists can be involved in. So pharmacists can be involved in drug development and clinical research. This is where they're doing more of the work that happens behind the scenes before a drug comes to market. Pharmacists can also be involved with regulatory affairs. And so they're making sure all of the regulations are followed, and they may help with submissions to the FDA. Then you have pharmacists that are working in quality control and assurance. And so they're making sure all of the drug manufacturing practices are followed. You also have pharmacovigilance, which focuses on medications that are currently on the market and all of the safety data that is coming in after a medication is already FDA approved, because what we have learned many times is that what you see in a clinical trial is likely going to vary from what you see in real life. Another common job that pharmacists who work in industry do is medical affairs. So this is more of an education component where they go out and educate other healthcare professionals about the medication. This is different from a pharmaceutical drug rep, where they aren't doing marketing, but more so education. However, there are pharmacists that do work on the marketing side and help market the medications. And in this podcast would become very, very long if I listed even more of the different aspects of industry. So know that these are just a few of the common ones, but there are even more than that. So industry has an abundance of different opportunities in a wide variety of different areas in these companies. Where these pharmacists work varies based on the job and the company that they're with. So some of them may be required to work in an office. Some of them may be fully remote. I've seen a lot of hybrid jobs recently where there are a couple days in the office, but also the option to do remote most of the time. And depending on what position you take, there may be travel required, and sometimes frequent travel, like a couple times a week travel, if you're in like one of those medical affairs positions, or if you're a clinical research associate. For the most part, these jobs are a little bit more stable daytime hours. However, based on your specific role and the travel requirements, you may have to work outside of that. And so there might be more variability in certain jobs. And according to Glassdoor, the average salary was around $123,000 for these roles, with a most likely range of $104,000 to $149,000. Now, I will say that the salaries reported here are lower than what I have heard from those who work in the industry. Now, that may be because there's oftentimes bonuses or stocks that can be purchased at a reduced price, or other compensation on top of the base pay. So that may be where I'm hearing larger numbers than this. So just keep that in mind. So technically there's not additional training required for this, but I would say the most common route into industry right now is doing a fellowship out of pharmacy school. These are highly competitive, and I know pharmacists who have transitioned also from clinical practice, where they did a residency, worked for a few years, and then took that clinical knowledge into an industry position with them. The biggest piece of advice I hear from people who are working in industry is that you need to network, and networking is how you get your foot in the door for one of these pharmaceutical industry positions. So that was a lot of information about these jobs, and this is just scratching the surface of each. There are more components to these jobs than I mentioned here. And I don't think that any of these jobs are perfect or there's one right answer to what job you should take, but the right job will depend on the person and what things interest you the most. Do you want to work with patients? Do you want to use your clinical knowledge to do drug levels? Do you want to work with the medical team, and how do you want to work with the medical team? What kind of hours do you want? What's the work environment that you thrive in? Right now, a lot of pharmacists who are working in community and even hospital are experiencing burnout. I would say our community pharmacy friends are experiencing it at a higher level, and there may be a little bit more work-life integration in some of these industry roles. Where you want to live could play a factor, because many of these industry jobs are located on the coast, both east and west. And so if you're somebody who's wanting to be in the Midwest, there are still opportunities here, but they may be fewer and more far between and a little bit more selective in what your job opportunities are. So these are all factors to consider when thinking about a pharmacist job or which pharmacist job you're most interested in. So I hope that this episode helped give you a little bit of a general sense of these jobs and what it entails, so you can use this information to continue your research and figure out which one might be right for you. For those who are interested in residency, I do have some resources on that since I went through residency myself, so I will leave those free resources down in the show notes or description, depending on where you're watching or listening. And with that, thank you all for watching or listening. Until next time, keep on living your happy farm life. Bye.